You know, history has told us time and again that there are 5 proven principles that determine our happiness, our success, and our leadership effectiveness. But yet, these same 5 principles, when we need them the most, we seem to do exactly the opposite. Even though there is enough proof that these 5 principles make you successful, make you happy, make you effective as a leader, it's almost as if, you know, when it's time to use them, our brain automatically goes into denial and we do the exact opposite. We're very quick to criticize others when they don't live by these principles, but for ourselves, it's very convenient for us to not do it and completely go into denial. Let me walk you through each of those 5 very quickly, and I'll try to tell a quick story for each one of them. The first one has to do with how you earn respect. You know, recently I was watching TV and I saw an Asian politician being driven by his driver in his fancy limousine as they came to a toll booth. The toll booth attendant demanded the fee, and he was told by the driver that my boss is a politician, a member of parliament, an MP, and therefore he's allowed to go free. The attendant knew the rules. He said, okay, perfect, but show me an ID that he is indeed an MP and I'll let you go. The politician got so angry, he got out of his car, took out his gun, pointed at the attendant and said, how dare you ask me to show you my identity? I'm a member of parliament. You don't know that? When the CCTV footage of this gun-wielding MP was on national television the next day, here's what he said: I am a member of parliament and I deserve to be respected. Contrast this story with another incident that I saw almost 20 years ago. I was working for a global financial services company, and the former branch manager of this particular branch visited. And I noticed that as he walked from one department to the other, everybody stood up. And even though he kept telling people to sit down, they wouldn't sit down until he had shaken everybody's hand and had moved well past the department. Later on, I asked people, why was everybody standing up even after the guy said sit down? He says, well, this guy was an amazing leader. He knew everybody by name. He took care of every little thing about us. He asked about our families. Whenever we needed him, he was there. And by standing up is the least we could do to show our respect in return for what he did for us. The second principle is that there are hardly any zero-sum games in life, and yet most people get into compete mode whenever there is the slightest whiff of a difference between two parties. It is well known that to be able to maximize your gains, you have to try and maximize the other party's gains as well. Solving their problem has to be your problem as well, but yet whenever we are in a situation, in a conflict situation or a negotiation situation, we automatically go into compete mode, which is we become focused on our interests and not on both parties' interests. Take the example of the Camp David Accord of 1978. Egypt and Israel had fought many years of bloody wars over the Sinai Peninsula before the two leaders came to Camp David at the invitation of President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter asked both parties. He asked President Sadat of Egypt, what's your issue? Why do you want the Sinai Peninsula back? And it turned out that Egypt's concerns were about sovereignty. It's our land, we need it back. How come somebody's taking it away from us? He asked Prime Minister Begin, why does Israel want to keep the Sinai Peninsula? And by asking that question, what uncovered was the fact that they had security concerns. If Egypt gets back the Sinai Peninsula, they can attack us anytime, and we have security concerns. By going under the iceberg and putting needs and interests of both parties at the table, understanding that this was not a zero-sum game, they were able to resolve it by saying, all right, the Sinai Peninsula goes back to Egypt. Egypt gets exactly what it wants. But at the same time, we're going to address Israel's security interests by making sure that the Sinai Peninsula is a demilitarized zone under UN supervision. And that peace lasted for decades. The point is, we know for a fact that there are hardly any zero-sum games in life, and yet we get into automatic compete mode. If you want to maximize your gain, maximize their gain as well. The third principle is that happiness and misery are both creations of one's own mind. I remember in my Wall Street days, this trader named John. You know, he was an excellent trader. He had done very well for himself at a very young age. He had become MD well before he was 30 and stashed away millions of savings, had the best houses and the best cars. So he had every reason to be feel very successful and very happy at the age that he was in. but instead he kept comparing himself for the very few, maybe a handful of people in the firm that had more money than him, that were perhaps more successful at wealth creation than him, and he felt miserable. My God, why am I not the top grosser? Why am I not as successful as them? He led himself to his own demise, because he was so keen to get up, to catch up with the Joneses, if you will, that he started to take positions well beyond his limits. He was so confident about his ability to read markets, and he felt that, long before anybody finds out, I'm going to reverse the positions, make a profit, and then I'm going to catch up with everybody because I'm going to get the bigger bonuses. Well, eventually the game caught up with him and the markets moved against him, and he was caught with way off limits, and now he's facing criminal charges. On the other hand, recently a colleague of mine woke up one morning living in Asia that her house in Boston had been razed to the ground due to a bushfire. And the first thing that came out of her mouth was, thank God nobody was there. Thank God our whole family is safe, and it's so beautiful. So point I'm trying to make is, we all know that it's all in our own mind, and yet we create our own misery when we can actually create our own happiness. And the fourth principle is that forgiveness is not a sign of weakness. Again, we should remember this principle, but when we are attacked, when somebody hurts us in some way, we automatically go into attack mode. You hurt me, I'm going to punish you, and I'm going to take revenge. And we know that revenge is not a good thing, not necessarily good for our success or our happiness. It doesn't resolve anything. Imagine if Mahatma Gandhi had used that philosophy against everything that was going on at the time. Would he have been as successful? Imagine if Nelson Mandela, after 27 years of wrongful imprisonment, had ordered revenge. What would have happened to the vision of the Rainbow Nation? I can guarantee that if the word revenge had even once come out of his mouth, the nation of South Africa would have had only one color, and that would be red. And the fifth one is that humility and empathy form the bedrock of effective leadership. Yet, we tend to use position power and our seniority rather than humility and empathy in order to get what we want done from our people. This is a peculiar problem in Asian countries, from India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Korea, Japan, you name it, and Asian countries have this problem. I am senior either by age, I am head of family, or I am senior by position, I am the CEO, you must listen to me. My word is the law. What happens? We kill innovation. What happens? We get compliance, and we confuse that compliance for deep motivation. The problem with using position power rather than humility and empathy, which involves listening, is that what are your people doing when you are not looking? Confusing compliance with motivation, with motivated action, is a huge problem. And yet, we don't seem to understand that. The world's best and the greatest leaders used empathy and humility as their biggest weapons, and we seem to not learn from them. So those, friends, are the 5 principles that the human brain continues to deny time after time. It shouldn't be like that. Recent advances in neuroscience tell us that neuroplasticity, with neuroplasticity, we can actually train the brain to actually not deny these 5 things. The way to do that is to be conscious of your behavior when you are in denial of these principles, and visualize yourself actually acting according to those principles, and you're going to be just fine. Over time, the brain will train itself to not be in denial. So go ahead and rewire your brain, because you can.